He was not important. He didn't sit in embassies. He didn't sign treaties. He didn't carry briefcases handcuffed to his wrist. He pushed laundry carts in the basement of a luxury hotel, 41 years old. 2 kids who thought he worked at a big building. A small rented flat that always smelled a little like detergent and cigarettes. If you stayed in that famous neutral capital hotel in the late Cold War, there's a good chance he pressed your shirt. You just never saw his face. The hotel lobby was all marble, brass, and chandeliers. The laundry was concrete, steam, and noise. Up there, diplomats, ministers, businessmen, cultural delegations. Down here, humming machines, humming fluorescent tubes, and a radio that never quite held a signal. Mountains of white shirts arrived every night in tall metal cages, some from ordinary guests, some from important suites whose doors he would never be allowed to knock on. He knew them only by tags. Room 514, Express. Suite 802, Rush, Presidential, before 7. The rules were simple. No one reads what's in pockets. No one keeps what they find. No one asks why a shirt smells like cologne and gun oil at the same time. If you find something, you put it in a small plastic envelope, staple on the room number, send it back via housekeeping. The hotel liked its world neat. The laundry was where the mess went to die. He noticed the shirts in winter, not all shirts, just a particular kind. At first, they were just the good ones, expensive, stiff cotton with hand-stitched initials on the cuff. But after a while, he saw the pattern. They always came on the same days, Tuesday, Friday, always marked Express, Rush, always needed by 7S. The names on the tickets changed. Different guests, different room numbers. But the shirts felt like clones. Same unusual cut, slightly narrower shoulders, longer sleeves. Same fabric that held a crease too well. Same tiny extra thickness in one place, inside the collar, along the back seam. He'd ironed tens of thousands of shirts. He knew how they were supposed to feel under his fingers. These felt wrong. A little too heavy at the neck. A little too stiff along one tiny line. Not enough to complain about. Just enough to remember. He joked once to his coworker, "Looks like someone's hiding gold bars in their collars." The coworker laughed, flicked ash into a bin, and turned up the radio. The nights blurred together. Feed the washers, load the dryers, sort whites from colors, wealthy from merely rich. The politicians and cultural attachés came and went upstairs. Flags changed outside. News anchors argued about missiles, sanctions, summits. Down here, the only wars were against coffee stains and bad stitching, until the wrong heat hit the wrong shirt. It happened at 3 a.m, the time of night when your body thinks the world should be asleep and resents you for not listening. He was behind on express orders. A whole sports team had dumped their uniforms on them after midnight. The iron had been on too long. He knew that. But there were 10 shirts left on the rush rail, and the clock on the wall was ticking toward 4. He grabbed one of the good shirts, white, perfect. Initials embroidered in dark blue, CW. He smoothed the collar on the board. Steam hissed, the iron glided. Then the smell changed. Not the usual hot cotton, something sharper. He felt it through his hand. The slightest give, like something under the fabric, was softening. He lifted the iron. A thin line along the back of the collar was wrong. The stitching looked fine, but the puff of padding underneath had shifted. He pressed gently with his thumb. The seam felt soft, not like cloth, like plastic that had begun to melt. A tiny blister bulged where the iron had lingered too long. "Great," he muttered. "Burned a fancy collar. That's my week's pay." He should have put it aside, written a damage note, taken the hit. Instead, curiosity nudged his thumbnail into the bulge. just a little. The fabric tore with a sound like a whisper. Something slid out. Not foam, not thread. A tiny, tightly rolled strip of something black and glossy, no bigger than a matchstick, spilled into his hand. He froze. It glinted under the harsh laundry light in a way no padding ever did. He unrolled it carefully between damp fingers. Translucent. Frames. Tiny rectangles with shadows that might be lines of text or numbers. Not tape, not film like from a camera. Smaller. Denser. He didn't know the word for it. He had seen it in movies. Microfilm. His heart started beating in the wrong places. Up in his throat, in his ears, behind his eyes. He glanced around the room. No cameras down here. They were too expensive, management said. The only witness was the steam. He swallowed, put the strip down on the ironing board, and reached into the torn collar. His fingers found paper, minuscule, folded again and again into a sliver. He teased it out. Thin, almost translucent paper. Onion skin, covered in numbers. Not laundry codes, not room numbers. Columns of digits separated into groups by slashes and dots. It looked like nothing. It looked like everything. His first stupid thought was, someone hid their bank account in their shirt. His second thought was worse. This is not about money for dry cleaning. Everything okay back there? The voice snapped him upright. It was the night duty manager leaning in the doorway with a clipboard. Perfect hair, perfect tie, bags under his eyes. He could talk about guest satisfaction metrics for 10 minutes straight without blinking. Yes, the laundry worker said too fast. Just behind a little. The manager's eyes swept the room, the piles of damp linen, the neat rows of finished shirts. They did not land on the ironing board. Not yet. You remember the rules? The manager said. No personal items kept. Anything found goes to lost and found by room number. We had a complaint yesterday. A guest lost something important. Yes, he said. I remember. The manager nodded, scribbled something, and left. The door swung half shut behind him. The worker exhaled slowly. His hand closed around the microfilm by instinct, hiding it in his palm. He slipped the folded strip of numbers under the board, where the fabric cover sagged. His heart hammered. The radio picked up a foreign station, a man's voice talking about tension and negotiations and possible escalation. The words echoed in the tunnel of his skull. He looked at the torn collar again. There was no way to pretend he hadn't seen. He could repair the seam. He could iron over it, press the cotton flat, send the shirt back upstairs like nothing had happened. He could hand the whole mess in and write, "Found strange item in collar." He could do nothing. Each option felt like a different kind of disaster. He checked the tag again. Room 814, Express. Initials, CW. No name, just a number like always. But now the number felt less like guest and more like target. He had seen men like CW in the lobby. Quiet. Clean shoes. Boring suits. Some carried small diplomatic pouches with little metal seals. Doormen smiled at them with a special, stiff smile, the kind reserved for people whose bags no one ever randomly checked. He imagined knocking on 814 with the shirt over his arm. Imagine. "Excuse me, sir, your collar was full of secrets. Do you still want light starch?" The thought made him want to laugh and vomit at the same time. He didn't notice the other shirts on the rack until then. 3 more of the exact same cut, same fabric, same slightly thick collar seam, all on the express bar. All for tomorrow morning, different room numbers. He ran his fingers along the backs of the collars, tiny hard ridges, like nerves under skin. The pattern snapped into place in his head with a horrible clarity. It wasn't one guest with a secret. The hotel laundry itself was a post office. Upstairs, the Cold War played out in press conferences, banquets, careful smiles. Down here, in the roar of machines, tiny rolls of microfilm and strips of numbers were traveling inside collars from room to room, from guest to guest, from hand to hand, washed, ironed, refreshed by people who were never supposed to see them, people like him. He was still staring at the rack when a voice said, very softly, almost at his ear, "Excuse me, I think you have something of mine." He spun around. No guests ever came down here. They complained upstairs, they sent notes, they never walked through steam and lint to find a shirt. But there he was, a man in a perfectly pressed suit that did not belong in a basement. No name tag, no laundry trolley. Just a pair of calm eyes that slid from the torn collar to his hand to the small dark glint of microfilm he hadn't realized was still visible between his fingers. The man smiled, a thin, polite hotel lobby smile. "Room 814, he said. "CW, may I have my shirt and whatever fell out of it?" For a second, nobody moved. Steam hissed from the press. The radio crackled with some distant crisis, and the man from room 814 stood in the doorway of the laundry like he owned the building. Perfect suit, perfect hair, no name tag. His eyes went from the torn collar to the strip of microfilm glinting near the worker's fingers to the rack of identical shirts behind him. He smiled as if nothing in this picture was strange. "Room 814, he repeated. "CW, you seem to have opened something that belongs to me." The laundry worker's first instinct was stupid and honest. To say, "I'm sorry," hand everything over, and hope this man's anger stopped at a complaint form. His second instinct was louder, to run. He didn't move. His thumb closed over the microfilm, hiding it in his fist. "I burned the collar," he said, forcing his voice to sound normal. "Too hot, something inside melted. I was just checking the damage." The man in the suit stepped closer. No hotel manager ever did that. They hovered at the door, never past the line where shoes could get wet. This man walked through steam and lint like he had done it before. "Of course," CW said. "These things happen, may I?" His hand reached out, fast and casual, for the shirt on the board. The worker lifted it away by reflex. Wrong move. For a heartbeat, they were both holding the same fabric. The man's grip was gentle but very firm. "Careful," he said softly. "Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt over a little mistake." There was nothing in his voice. That was the worst part. No anger, no overt threat, just the suggestion that consequences existed, and he knew how to find them. "Everything all right in here?" The second interruption in 5 minutes. This time, it wasn't the duty manager. It was one of the hotel's security guards, the older one, with the scar on his chin and the bored eyes that saw more than he ever commented on. He stood in the doorway with his hands loosely clasped in front of him. Blue blazer, radio on his shoulder. He took in the scene. Guest in a suit in the laundry, torn collar. 2 men holding one shirt. "That area is staff only, sir," the guard said pleasantly. "If you need laundry assistance, reception will be happy to—" "It's fine," CW said without looking at him. "I'm retrieving a personal item." "From the laundry," the guard said. "At 3:30 in the morning." The man in the suit finally turned his head. The smile didn't leave his mouth. But his eyes changed. For a fraction of a second, something sharp and calculating slid across them, like a knife blade catching the light. The worker felt the temperature in the room drop, despite the steam. He didn't understand the few seconds that followed until later. He only registered pieces. CW's fingers loosening slightly on the shirt, the guard's radio crackling, a burst of static and a muffled voice. "Basement laundry, Copy. Proceed. The guards answering copy sounded too calm. Two more figures appearing in the corridor behind him. Not hotel staff. Dark suits that didn't match the hotel uniform. ID badges on lanyards that weren't the hotel crest. CW saw them. His smile flattened, not quite vanishing, but losing all warmth it had pretended to have. "Seems there's more interest in your personal item than usual, sir," the guard said. "Perhaps we should all talk upstairs." For the first time, the man in the suit let go of the shirt. He adjusted his cuffs slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "In that case," he said, "I think I've lost interest." He turned, walked past the suited newcomers without acknowledging them, and left the laundry. Nobody tried to stop him. Not here, not yet. This was a hotel, not a border post. But the worker saw one of the men in suits murmur something into a lapel mic as CW passed. The words sounded like a room number. "Sir," one of the newcomers said to the worker, once the corridor emptied, "would you please step away from the board and keep your hands visible?" The laundry worker obeyed. The microfilm rolled, sweaty and tiny, inside his closed fist. His heart hammered so loudly, he was sure they could hear it over the machines. The older guard killed the power to the irons. Steam faded. The basement suddenly felt colder. "Let's all go somewhere a little quieter," the other suited man said. "We'd like to ask you about that shirt, and a few others like it." They didn't take him to a police station. They took him to a small conference room on a service floor he'd never had reason to visit. Neutral carpet, neutral walls, neutral water carafe, and 4 glasses. The kind of room where people signed contracts they later pretended not to remember. The 2 suited men sat opposite him. The older guard stood by the door, arms folded, now suddenly looking less like hotel staff and more like someone with a different employer entirely. "We are with the Federal Security Service," the man on the left said, showing an ID just long enough for it to register as official and then disappear. "Internal section." He didn't name it. In this country, people kept the letters of their services out of casual conversation. "In simple terms," the man on the right added, "we protect this place from becoming a playground for other people's games." They both looked at the worker. "And tonight," the first one said, "you stepped right into the middle of one." He told the story again, the shirts, the pattern, the extra thick collar seams, the burned one, the torn padding, the microfilm and the strip of numbers. He left nothing out this time, not out of bravery, but because trying to lie with his heart pounding like this was beyond him. When he mentioned the man from 814 coming down personally, both security men exchanged a look that had weight. "And the object you found?" the second man asked. "The film?" The worker hesitated. His fist was still closed in his lap, his palm slick with sweat. He opened his hand slowly and placed the tiny roll of microfilm on the table. No dramatic music, no gasps. Just a very small, very sharp focus in the eyes across from him. The first man picked it up with a handkerchief, as if it were made of acid, and dropped it into a little black evidence box. They did the same with the strip of paper he'd hidden under the ironing board cover. "You did well to keep these," the first man said. It didn't sound like praise. It sounded like an assessment. "As opposed to what?" the worker asked. "Giving them back?" The second man smiled without humor. "Men like our friend from 814 have many ways of making people hand things back," he said. "None of them do your health any good." They showed him things then, not all, enough, photos of different hotel guests, clipped from surveillance tapes and blown up. Some he recognized. Their faces had been on news broadcasts, shaking hands with ministers, smiling at cameras. Others were nobodies in suits. All had worn shirts with very good collars, On another sheet, he saw a schematic, not of the hotel, of a route, room numbers connected by arrows, laundry runs, delivery times. Between certain rooms were red circles and little notes in cramped handwriting. Pouch. Drop. Pickup. It looked surprisingly like the laundry logistics charts his boss sometimes waved around. Only this one mapped secrets, not stains. For 3 years, the first man said, tapping the chart, this hotel has been used as a message hub between foreign intelligence officers and their local contacts. Not just one service, several. He pointed to one red circle. Here, a man from the east, he said. To this room, a man from the west. In between, dry cleaning, collars, cuffs, pockets, neat little hiding places. He moved his finger along the arrows. We've had hints, he said. Intercepted calls, strange patterns, money moving through shell companies linked to consultancies with permanent suites upstairs. But we couldn't prove the physical channel. Until you burned a collar, the second man added. His tone was almost amused. Let me be sure I understand, the laundry worker said slowly. You're telling me the Cold War has been running through my steam presses, and nobody thought to mention it? The first man shrugged. Think of this place as the city's living room, he said. Everyone wants to pretend nothing serious happens on the carpet, but if you look under it... He let the sentence trail off. What happens now? The worker asked. Now, the second man said, now we work faster than the people upstairs. They explained it in blunt, practical terms. They would let the routine continue, for a few days, maybe weeks. Keep accepting the shirts, keep washing and pressing. Except now, every collar that felt too thick, every express ticket from certain rooms would be quietly intercepted, documented, copied. They would trace who sent what, and when, and where it was supposed to land. They would swap some things with imitations. Let other parcels go missing in ways that pointed to internal betrayal, to make the network distrust its own people. And when enough of them have stuck their hands into the same drawer, the first man said, we slam it shut. The worker thought of all those shirts passing through his hands. He suddenly felt very, very tired. What about me? He asked. Do I just keep ironing? For the moment, the second man said, yes. He slid a card across the table. On it, a phone number. If anyone asks you about this, he said, anyone from upstairs, anyone who isn't wearing one of our badges, you call that number from a public phone. You say only your name and the word laundry. Then you hang up. And if I don't, then we will assume, the first man said quietly, that someone else has convinced you to be on their side, and we will act accordingly. The laundry worker believed him. He had no idea what accordingly meant. He didn't want to find out. The crackdown came faster than they'd hinted. He didn't see most of it. He heard pieces, rumors in the staff cafeteria, important guests who checked out abruptly at dawn, a sudden flurry of suited people in the lobby who weren't carrying luggage. The news, when it arrived, was sanitized. A short item about an international financial and intelligence scheme disrupted by authorities. No hotel name, no mention of collars. A blurry image of men in suits being guided into unmarked cars. The country prided itself on neutrality. It did not like to advertise that its most expensive hotel had been used as a secret post office for 3 rival services at once. Behind the scenes, though, someone counted. Arrests in 3 capitals. Frozen accounts in 4 jurisdictions. A handful of quiet diplomatic recalls wrapped in language about health issues and early retirement. The laundry worker went to his shift as usual. The shirts kept coming. Some looked the same as always, some did not. One day, the extra thick collars simply stopped. No more Tuesday-Friday pattern. No more strange ridges under his fingers. Whoever ran the network had decided the channel was burned. They had moved their secrets to other pipes. Much more expensive, much less comfortable ones. He didn't get a medal. He got a meeting with hotel management. In light of recent restructuring, the general manager said, staring at a point somewhere over his left shoulder, "We are reducing staff in certain departments." They gave him a small envelope. Compensation. No reference to anything except economic reasons. He walked out of the hotel he'd worked in for 12 years with his locker contents in a plastic bag. No guard of honor. No handshake from important men. Just the knowledge that the most dangerous work he'd ever done had been done in an apron, not a suit. Years later, the story leaked in fragments. Not his name. That stayed missing. Reporters dug up mentions of coded information hidden in pressed garments, hotel services abused for espionage purposes, an operation disrupted thanks to a mistake in the laundry. On the internet, someone joked that it sounded like a bad movie plot. He read the headline once in a cafe, over cheap coffee, on a borrowed newspaper. He smiled. Then he put the paper down and went back to his new job pressing shirts in a much cheaper hotel, the kind where guests paid in cash and never signed anything more complicated than a minibar slip. Sometimes, when the iron hissed and the fabric smoothed under his hands, he thought about those collars, about the tiny roll of film in his palm, about the man from 814 walking into the steam like it was his territory, about the quiet men from the internal service mapping routes with red circles. He thought about how, for a few weeks, the front line of the Cold War had run not along borders or through embassies, but through his workspace, between the washers and the dryers, along a strip of padding inside a collar, across the few centimeters where a too-hot iron had melted the wrong piece of thread. He didn't tell the story often. When he did, people sometimes laughed. As if a laundry guy could bring down a spy network, they said. He didn't argue. He just shrugged, took another shirt from the pile and set the iron down. He knew the truth the reports never printed. Sometimes history trips not over grand strategy but over a tired hand, a cheap seam, and a man in a basement who refuses to pretend he didn't see what fell out of someone else's perfect shirt. By the way, let's step out of the laundry room for a moment. Because the strangest part of this story isn't the microfilm. It isn't the collars. It isn't even the quiet men from internal security. The strangest part is how normal all of this actually is for the way real spy networks used to work. When we think Cold War espionage, we picture trench coats, dead drops under park benches, shadowy meetings in back alleys. But most of the time, the front line wasn't in dark alleys. It was in normal services that nobody ever thought about. Dry cleaners, taxi companies, phone repair crews, cafeterias, hotel bars, and yes, hotel laundries. All those places have one thing in common. They see everything, handle everything, and are treated as if they are nothing. That's exactly what makes them perfect. If you're an intelligence service and you want to move tiny pieces of information or small packages of money through a foreign capital without setting off alarms, you look for 3 things. First, a place that has to handle personal belongings as part of its job. Nobody is suspicious when a laundry basket comes out of a VIP suite, or when a cart full of shirts disappears into a service elevator. Second, a place where names can change, but the route stays the same. Hotel guests come and go, room numbers change, but the laundry, every shirt, every suit, every bedsheet, follows the same invisible map, night after night. Third, a place staffed by people who have been trained, politely but firmly, to look away. Don't read the papers you find, don't touch what's in the pockets, don't ask questions. That's exactly what an intelligence officer wants. A pipeline full of obedient, underpaid ghosts. Hide a code strip in a collar. Hide a microfilm in a cuff. Hide a tiny key in the hem of a bathrobe. The guest sends it to be cleaned. It travels downstairs, mixed with 100 other garments. It gets ironed, folded, stacked. Then it comes back up to a different room, by mistake, or goes into lost and found, where the right pair of hands is waiting. On paper, nothing happened. In reality, an entire briefing, or a bank account, or a list of names just crossed a border without ever touching a border post. And here's the uncomfortable part. None of this requires genius-level tradecraft. You don't need invisible ink or exploding briefcases. You just need to know how systems work. Who touches what, who never gets watched, who gets ignored even when they are standing in the middle of the frame. In our story, that invisible person was a tired laundry worker on the night shift. In real operations, it might be a janitor with keys to every secure office, a cleaner who empties shred bins, a line cook who hears off-the-record conversations in a restaurant kitchen, a receptionist who sees who checks in under what name and who pays cash. The pattern is always the same. The system builds a whole class of people it expects to be silent background noise. Spies look at that background and see a highway. When you understand that, the whole Cold War starts to look different. It's not just missiles and summits. It's a million small routines that someone quietly exploited. A neutral country's famous hotel becomes a switchboard. Not for phone calls, but for secrets. Information in one direction, money in the other. And the people upstairs in their marble lobby never truly realize that the most sensitive traffic in the building doesn't pass through the front desk. It passes through steam and lint, through a room where the floor is always wet and the radio never quite plays in tune. The other thing this story shows is how fragile these perfect channels really are. You can spend years building them, recruiting assets, setting up fake companies, bribing managers, training couriers. You can tell yourself it's airtight, invisible, bulletproof, and then one night an overworked man with an old iron leaves it on a collar 2 seconds too long, and the whole thing begins to unravel. Not because a genius analyst cracked a code, not because a high-level mole switched sides, because someone at the very bottom of the system decided not to pretend they hadn't seen what fell out. That's the part the big reports never like to emphasize. They list operations, they list code names, they list budgets and operational successes. What they don't list is the long, invisible column of people in aprons and overalls whose tiny actions make those successes real or destroy them completely. And if you think this is all just ancient history, look around. We live in a world where cleaning crews plug vacuum cleaners into corporate networks. Security guards have access to badge logs, CCTV feeds, and delivery schedules. Food couriers walk into office lobbies dozens of times a day without being challenged. IT contractors remotely touch more data in an hour than a Cold War microfilm could carry in a year. The tools changed. The principle didn't. The new laundry rooms are cloud storage, forgotten email inboxes, unpatched printers, shared Wi-Fi in cafes, and third-party services nobody ever bothers to audit. The question is still the same. Who is handling what you consider background? And what could happen if one of them stays curious for just a little too long? In the story, they erased the laundry worker's name from the report. They paid him a small envelope and called it restructuring. On paper, he was never the reason a multi-million-dollar spy channel collapsed. But if you follow the real route, from shirt to collar to microfilm to conference room to arrests in 3 capitals, you always end up back in the same place. A basement, a tired man, a seam that shouldn't have melted, and a decision no one expected him to make. Not to look away, not this time. And that's the real cold truth behind a lot of secret history. Massive systems don't just fail from outside pressure. They also trip over the people they thought were safely invisible,